There we go.
Excellent. There we go. Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Planning Advisory Committee meeting for August 5th, 2025. I'll look for a mover and a seconder to open the meeting. Moved by member Poisey, seconded by member Langlois. Thank you. That this meeting be opened at 6:06 p.m. All in favor? That's carried. Moving to the adoption of the agenda. I'll look for a mover and a seconder. Moved by Mayor Paquette. Seconded by member Winsky. That the agenda presented to the Planning Advisory Committee Planning Advisory Committee dated August 5th, 2025 be adopted as prepared. All in favor? Carried. The adoption of the previous minutes. I'll look for a mover and a seconder. Moved by member Poisey, seconded by Paquette. That the minutes of the Planning Advisory Committee meeting dated July 8th, 2025 be adopted as circulated. Questions or comments on those? All in favor? That's carried. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. There are, I believe, no presentations from delegations. So we'll move on to consent application B6 2025 Boyer. Application for consent, proposed severance to create one new lot on lands legally described as concession 4 part lot 35 parcel 778 747 Mount Pleasant Road. I'll turn it over to the planning administrator to walk us through a few of the details.
Sure, yeah. So this is a consent application, as Jason mentioned, which seeks to sever the existing property located at 747 Mount Pleasant Road. This is lands legally described as concession 4, lot 35, parcel 778, and it's to create new one lot of record. So the property proposed to be severed comprises an existing dwelling with accessory buildings, an existing sewage system, and a well. So that would be a 5-acre parcel or 2 hectares. And essentially the remainder of the property, the 95 acres or 38.4 hectares, which kind of envelope around it, would be the retained portion. So the subject property is designated within the official plan as falling within the rural area and is zoned rural for planning purposes. A small swathe of land along the northern perimeter boundary of the property is designated as a secondary sand and gravel resource area. And in addition, a development constraint area formed by a small tributary and an unevaluated wetland. Sometimes that's referred to as an approximate regulated area, technical term, I guess, by the Conservation Authority, but that applies to lands that are largely to the south and southwest of the landholding. So the proposed severed lot, which would be the existing dwelling, as I say, would have a frontage of approximately 200 meters and be accessed as it is right now off Mount Pleasant Road. The depth would be approximately 133 meters and the area would be 5 acres. The retained lot, so the larger portion wrapping around, would be fronting onto La Plante Road. So the frontage would be 400 meters with the depth going down the concession of 1,000 meters. And the total area of that would be the remainder, the 95 acres. So the applicant has actually stated that they're interested in constructing a new dwelling in the top northeast corner of the land to be retained, to be accessed off La Plante Road.
Where is the constraint area? To the north?
So it's to the far south of the property
Okay.
to be severed. It would be, well,
Here.
yeah. That's right, yeah, that area, yeah. Yes, so just in terms of the planning policies and just a review of that. So the provincial planning statement, as we know, is very supportive of housing development. This property has never been severed before, so there's potential to not only do this, potentially sever more, but not on this occasion. It contains a range of policies which relate to rural areas, rural lands. A review of those seem to suggest the application is in conformity with the kind of tests that are set out. So no concerns there. In terms of sewage and water and stormwater, the proposed development is located to the east of Mount Pleasant. So the big kind of landscape feature that some people may have seen as you drive along LaPlante Road, it deviates up and around that. So it's an existing geographical feature, but looking at the topographical maps for that, all the tributaries flow away from that to the north, so away from the subject property here. So there's no particular risk of stormwater flooding to this property or the proposed one. So in terms of natural assets, the wise use and management of resources, as noted, a small swathe of land along the boundary at the top there is referred to as sand and gravel secondary resource designation. This actually relates to a larger swathe that covers a series of adjoining properties off towards the west there. But it only applies to, I believe it's like 4.5% of the actual land holding of this property. So it's not foreseeable that this would be incorporated in any way as part of a wider industrial aggregate operation. And it's actually separated from the existing active quarry beyond Mount Pleasant itself. So it's over 480 meters to the west of this. And there's an additional dwelling, which is kind of sandwiched between the proposed dwelling here and where the aggregate operation exists. So the precedent has been set, if you like, in terms of residential in proximity to that industrial use. And of course, the mountain itself, if there were any expansion of those activities, it continues to act as a buffer, a big physical buffer, which can prevent kind of noise or any odor, dust that might arise from such operations. In terms of agriculture, we did a bit of a scan there. There's a couple of properties. So there's one immediately north of LaPlante Road, where there's a barn. We got some dimensions for that one. And so was able to plug this information into the minimum distance separation formulae tool that the ministry has. The same with the chicken coop / shed, which is located to the south east of the existing dwelling to be severed. So you can see on the sketch, it's shown as figure 2, but I've also blown that up as Appendix A in the package for anyone looking at home, which basically shows the extent of any effluent / odor that might arise from those existing barns. And again, they don't impact the subject property, either the existing dwelling to be severed or the proposed new dwelling. There's no material impact on those.
Where is the existing driveway to the suburb?
It's kind of very central, really.
In the central.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the application, we put a sand pit. Is it a gravel or
So it's this property that's 2 concessions off to the west. So there is an existing M3 industrial aggregate operation there. Driving by, it seemed closed. I don't know if they're open all the time, but I don't know that. But I mean, obviously they're licensed to operate from that facility. But by doing this test and looking at those factors that I just mentioned, the mount being in the way, an existing dwelling separating this and that, it's not seen to have any risk of impacting that aggregate operation if we were to allow this to move forward. Yeah, I'll just wrap this up. Yeah, in terms of the natural heritage features, so again, this approximate regulated area, it applies to a tributary which kind of starts central to the concession and then heads kind of off towards the south west of the property. There's an area there that is potentially subject to localized flooding. It's referred to as an unevaluated wetland, but again, it's just 'cause it's low lying, it's a bit swampy there. But where the existing dwelling is already in place in proximity to that, and the proposed dwelling would be at its closest point over 400 meters away from the top of the stream and hundreds of meters away really from the area that's assessed as being a wetland.
And the new MTO realignment is probably way south of that.
It's way north of it. We're far south of the town, far southeast of the township here. But yeah, Yeah, it is, yeah. It's a good 4 kilometers north, perhaps, of this, along River Glen line there, or just south of River Glen line. Yeah, so in terms of any comments, a member of the public did call. She wanted to state her objection in principle. I did follow up with an email. I gave all the same information that was on the notice that's on our website as usual. Here's my information. In order to participate, you can drop me something in writing. You can do it all the way up to this meeting if you wish. You could turn up at this meeting and present verbally, but that individual appears not to be here, so they've either passed that opportunity or I'm not sure. So there's no comments from the public. And in terms of the Conservation Authority, they had no objections to the proposals. Again, they've suggested that if development were to be proposed within 15 meters of the watercourse, and that distance seems to be being reduced in some of these applications, or within 30 meters of the wetland, and neither of these, the new dwelling would be far from that, as I say, then a section 28 permit would be required. But other than that, they note that because it is the original 100-acre concession, that there's more than sufficient land for a class 4F sewage system to service both the existing dwelling, if it needed to be replaced, and the proposed new dwelling. So there's no concerns from the Conservation Authority. Hydro One, no comments received at this time, but generally in this location of applications, they've just said the applicant should reach out and connect to the local distribution system. The Ministry of Transportation didn't have any comments because it's not in proximity to the highway, as we just mentioned, or their interests. The Bonfield Snowmobile Club says it's not anywhere close to any club maintained trails. And there was no particular comments from the Public Works or Fire Department. However, we have a proposed a condition here on behalf of Public Works that because the new dwelling, if it is to be constructed, then it's going to require an entrance permit. So that would need to be constructed to a standard that's acceptable to our Public Works manager. Yeah, so to summarize, we've evaluated all the rural policies. We've looked at some of the development constraint area, the wetland, we've assessed the agriculture, we've assessed the aggregate operations, and none of those factors appear to fall within a threshold of where we might say request an additional study or something like that. It doesn't seem to be anything that impedes development in this location. And
My own.
Yeah.
Because so they own no other abutting lands then?
that's right. So with that, I guess I can come back to Jason. Yeah.
Sure, so I'll look for a mover and a second, and then I'll read the entire motion. Just blankly. By Member Wolski. Seconded by Member Lindsay. That the Planning Advisory Committee recommends to Council that consent application B6 2025 Boyer, application for consent proposed severance to create one new lot on lands legally described as concession 4, lot 35, parcel 778, 747 Mount Pleasant Road be approved subject to the following conditions. 1, that the approval applies to the land legally described as concession 4, lot 35, parcel 778. 2, that the following documents be provided. A, the original executed transfer deed, a duplicate original, and 1 photocopy for our records. B, a copy of the survey plan deposited in the land titles office if required. C, an electronic copy of the survey emailed to planning@bonfieldtownship.com. D, a schedule describing the severed lands attached to the transfer for approval purposes. E, a schedule that provides a registerable legal description attached to the transfer for the retained lands for approved purposes if required. 3, that if there is a forced road situation, a 20-meter road allowance or whatever amount is required for road purposes shall be transferred to the municipality at the owner's expense across the whole or part of the parcel for which the severance was taken, and compensation shall be awarded as per the compensation grid for the transfer of forced roads. 4, that the building setbacks for all buildings must meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw for the retained and or severed lots, whichever are effective at the time of the survey. 5, a fee in lieu of parkland dedication shall be deposited in the office of the clerk prior to the stamping of any transfer document associated with the proposed lot to be severed. Reference is made to bylaw 2024-26, Schedule A, which contains a tariff of fees and should be referenced when documenting the amount payable. 6, any or all tax arrears must be paid prior to the stamping of the transfer documents for a new lot. 7, that the survey will apply to both the retained and proposed severed lands. 8, that all conditions must be satisfied and that the transfer documents must be signed and completed within a period of 2 years from the date of approval of consent. 9, that the North Bay Mattawa Conservation Authority 1, be consulted throughout the development of individual site plans associated with the proposed development of the severed and or retained lots. And 2, that a section 28 permit be obtained should any development be proposed within 15 meters of the water course or within 30 meters of an unevaluated wetland. 10, that an application for a driveway entrance permit be made to the Township Public Works Manager, and that the access be designed to the standard and specification that is sufficient to service the proposed new dwelling. Any questions or comments? All in favor? That's carried. Do we have any correspondence this evening?
Nope.
We have none. We are moving to the adjournment over for mover and a seconder. Moved by member Polinski. Seconded by. Second, I don't know, member Langwell. That this meeting be adjourned at 6:23 PM. All in favor? That's carried. Good night, everyone.
Okay.